Greetings. My name is Philip Hanston, and I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Washington. I spend about half of my time in the scientific field of drug interactions and the other half in philosophy. And combining the two, I teach philosophy of science. Today, we're going to talk about Seneca, and I'm going to do a screen share with some slides here. See if this will work. I think it will. Okay. Lucius Annaeus Seneca was born roughly 1 BCE. He's known as Seneca. You know you've made it when people refer to you with just one name, like Beyonce or Cher or Einstein or whatever. He was one of the most popular philosophers in his day, and actually he's become quite popular in the last couple of decades as well. He was born upper class in Cordoba, Spain, and went to Rome to become a statesman, orator, and of course, a thinker and writer in philosophy. He was exiled by Claudius, Emperor Claudius, to Corsica. I guess Corsica is a popular place to exile people. And he was there for roughly 8 years and had plenty of time to think and write while he was there. Thank goodness for us. He was called back to Rome, and unfortunately for him, he ended up being the tutor to Nero. Now, Nero does not look too interested in the lessons that Seneca is giving to him. He was accused of plotting against Nero, and Nero forced him to commit suicide. And apparently he committed suicide as a philosopher, similar to the way that Socrates did. Before we get, the name of this talk is Seneca's best idea, but before we get to what my opinion of his best idea is, we're going to talk about some of his really good ideas, which are also good. And I could have picked any of these, but I decided to pick anger, which is what the one we'll talk about last, as his best idea. Now, the love of philosophy. Seneca really did love philosophy, and philosophy was often considered as lady philosophy, as you see here. And Seneca says, but only philosophy will wake us. Only philosophy will shake us out of that heavy sleep. Devote yourself entirely to her. You're worthy of her. She's worthy of you. Fall into each other's arms. Now, this may sound like hyperbole, but actually that is how he felt about it. And I have to say, I can relate to this somewhat. Philosophy actually has enriched my life and even at times given me joy. So I think that he was probably not exaggerating when he said that. And he recommended the philosophical life. And he said, if I had not been admitted to these studies, it would not have been worthwhile being born. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. For what would there be to cause me delight in being numbered among the living? So he really did find philosophy to be an very important part of his life. And also for wisdom. It's clear to you, I know, Lucilius, which was his brother he was writing this letter to, that no one can lead a happy life or even one that is bearable without the pursuit of wisdom. And the perfection of wisdom is what makes the happy life. Although even the beginnings of wisdom make life bearable. And I think that's an important point. That last part he mentioned is an important point because he recognized then that it was any amount of philosophy can help. You don't have to be marinated in philosophy in order to gain wisdom from it. Okay. And he even said that philosophy saved his life. He said, regarding his ill health, he had very bad asthma. And he said, it was my Stoic studies that really saved me. For the fact that I was able to leave my bed and I was restored to health, I give the credit to philosophy. I owe her, and it is the least of my obligations to her, my life. Now, I don't know exactly what he was referring to there, but it certainly could have changed his attitude towards having this severe asthma and other disorders that he had. So love of philosophy is the first one. The second really good idea is the importance of Lady Fortune. And here, this could also be called fate or chance or luck, those kinds of things. And they really, the Stoics and others in ancient Rome and Greece focused a lot on fate. and Lady Fortune was in charge. Now here's Lady Fortune over here. She had a cornucopia in one hand to signify good stuff. And usually she has, not in this case, but usually she had a rudder, a ship's rudder over here in the other hand to show that she could twist your life in a heartbeat just by moving this ship's rudder. So Seneca says, so the spirit must be trained to a realization and acceptance of its lot. It must come to see that there is nothing Fortune will shrink from, that she wields the same authority over emperor and empire alike, and the same power over cities as over men. There's no grounds for resentment in all of this. So it was part of this was sort of an acceptance that that things happen to people in their lives, and some of them you really can't do much about. Again, Lady Fortune, bad weather tries the health and we have to be ill. Somewhere or other, we are going to have encounters with wild beasts and with man too, more dangerous than all those beasts. Floods will rob us of one thing, fire of another. These are all conditions of our existence which we cannot change. What we can do is adopt a noble spirit so that we can bear up bravely under all that fortune sends us. Now, certainly some of the things we can change or try to prevent, and the Stoics actually would have recommended that. They wouldn't be passive in the face of possible disasters. But nonetheless, an acceptance over the things that you really cannot change. And speaking of fires, I live in the area north of San Francisco, and in 2017, we were out of town. We came back, and our Volvo was the worst for wear. Parked it too close to a building that burned down. So the Seneca would say, "Hey, you lost a car. So what?" Another one of his really good ideas is the simple life. And he promoted this, interestingly, even though he was actually quite wealthy himself. But he understood that the simple life had a lot to say for it. This is Johannes Vermeer's Milkmaid, and it's showing a simple existence. And he said, it's not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who hankers after more. And this reminds me very much of the comment that Joseph Heller made, the author of Catch-22. Somebody was pointing out how acquisitive some people are to accumulate more and more wealth. And he replied wisely, well, I have something that those people will never have. And the person said, well, what? And he said, enough. And I think Seneca would agree with that statement. So Seneca wrote to his mother while he was in exile on Corsica, one should avoid the lunatic state of greed and luxury, which ruins everything. For how little is needed to support a man. As far as I'm concerned, I know that I have not lost wealth, but distraction. So here he is on Corsica with, very little. All of his wealthy stuff was still back in Rome. And he actually felt that this liberated him somewhat from having to take care of all that stuff. Now, it's okay to have stuff if you're really rich. This happens to be Steve Jobs' yacht. He never got to see it. He died before it was completed. But I've, over the last 10 years, spent a lot of time in La Paz, in Baja, California, Mexico. And we frequently saw his yacht there. And there were always dozens of helpers running around on this yacht, even when Jobs wasn't there, to take care of it. So if you're rich enough to have people take care of your stuff, your toys, then maybe it's not so bad. But Stilpo was a ancient Greek philosopher, and after Stilpo's town was destroyed by Demetrius, where he lost everything, somebody asked Stilpo whether he had lost anything, and he replied, "I have all my valuables with me." So basically what he was saying is that everything that was worthwhile he had in his brain or in his head and in his heart, and all that stuff was not really that important. Another one of his really good ideas is a worthy character. This was very important for the Stoics, and actually for many others in ancient Greece and Rome. And Seneca says, a good character is the only guarantee of everlasting carefree happiness. Even if some obstacle to this comes on the scene, its appearance is only to be compared to that of clouds, which drift in front of the sun without ever defeating its light. And by the way, this comes from the book Letters from a Stoic, which I think you can see there. which has become very popular. Some very rich people have been sending this around to all their friends. I've also used this Seneca Dialogues and Letters, and the anger essay and a lot of other stuff. Is the thickest one of all of them, is Seneca's moral and political essay. So those are the three books that I have read actually several times. So a worthy character is important, and a worthy character includes excellence in what you do. A person who, when asked, this is a quote from Seneca, a person who, when asked what was the object of all the trouble he took over a piece of craftsmanship, when it would never reach more than a very few people, replied, "A few is enough for me, so is one, and so is none." So the point was there that that excellence is part of this, of having a worthy character. You do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, not for any kudos that you could gain from it. So this is kind of integrity and excellence rolled into one. And the last really good idea I'd like to mention briefly is a life of purpose. Seneca felt that this was critical to a flourishing life. So you must not think a man has lived long because he has white hair and wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long. So the point here is that we usually have time enough to do all the things we really want to do. And living a life, actually living a life, means living a life of purpose. Now, looking at this guy, I suspect that he lived long and existed long, both. He looks like a pretty fun guy to me. So it's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and sufficiently generous amount of it has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. Now, I don't think he's claiming that that you should spend all of your time doing work. I mean, you need to have some time, downtime as well, to do fun things. But even accounting for that, there's usually enough time for most people. Some people's lives are cut short, and this is not possible. So he says, we must cut down on all this dashing about that a great many people indulge in. As they throng around houses and theaters and fora, they intrude into other people's affairs, always giving the impression of being busy. They then return home worn out to no purpose. So let all your activity be directed to some object. Let it have some end in view. And again, I think that he would be more than happy to for people to have hobbies and things that would just that just enrich their lives rather than having some objective to everything. But the point here is to not get so caught up in superficial things that you neglect the other things. Now, during COVID, we may not be doing a lot of this, running around in theaters and fora, but eventually when COVID is over, we might well be doing that again. So I think Seneca would agree with George Steiner, who just died this year, actually, a thinker, philosopher, literary critic, etc. And this is from George Steiner. He said, the immense majority of human biographies are a gray transit between domestic spasm and oblivion. So don't be one of those people, Seneca is telling us. Now, his very best idea, in my view, comes from his essay on anger. No plague has cost the human race more, he says. So let's just talk about this for a second. Let's suppose you're on your way to work. It's after COVID, you're on your way to work, and you're already late, and there's a huge traffic jam, and somebody wedges themselves right in front of you and causes you to miss a light, and now you're even later by several minutes than you would have been otherwise. So this generates anger probably in almost everybody. And Seneca takes us through the process that we go through. He says, during this provoked period. And he says, there are 4 steps, really. First, you realize that that person has done that, has cut in front of you and has made you even later. Then you become indignant about it. Then you condemn that person. You condemn what they have done. And then, heaven forbid, you try to exact some sort of retribution on them, which in some cases, of course, leads to road rage and worse. So, what he's saying is that we need to take action long before we are provoked by someone. we need to think about it ahead of time. We need to prepare for negative behavior. And this is something that the Stoics were very good at. And they actually just did this instinctively because they've been trained in Stoicism from a very early age. And by the way, I'm not going to go into a lot of Stoicism here because I cover that in my three-part series, YouTube series on the Stoics. So I'm not going to go into Seneca's great Stoic ideas to any great extent because that's covered in those other YouTubes. But if you prepare for negative behavior ahead of time, it can help a lot. So instead of counting to 10 after the event, what you do is prepare before it happens. Anger is really due to unrealistic expectations. So if you prepare ahead of time, and the Stoics called this meditation in advance. So when you get in the car, you know you're already late, you know the traffic is really bad. What you do is say, okay, probably something's going to happen where somebody's going to try to pull something. Everybody else is late too. And you think about that ahead of time. This is not pessimism, this is realism. So then when it actually happens, and I've tried this and it does actually work. Before you leave on in your car or wherever, or you're going on a trip somewhere or whatever, in the old days when we were taking airplanes, etc., you prepare yourself ahead of time that you're going to run across rude people and insolent people and people that are clueless, etc. And it does help because the first time it happens, then you say, aha, this is exactly what I was expecting. So that helps a lot, that first step. Another, if that doesn't succeed completely, another place to stop this sequence, this cascade of events, is right here at after you realize what's happened, and that is before you get indignant about it. And what Seneca is recommending at that point is to, and this is a quote from him, it's best to beat back at once the first irritation. So after the recognition that somebody's done something, so you beat back those first irritations to resist anger at the very beginning before you succumb. Once it's begun to carry us off course, the return to safety is difficult. Reason amounts to nothing once the passions have taken over. So what he's saying is, if you don't stop it here, once you get to this point, then you're done, because it's gonna, you may not exact retribution, but you certainly are going to be very angry by the time this thing is over, because you just go there. So you plan ahead of time, and then you try to cut it off at the pass using reason, actually, rather than just saying, oh, well, I just got carried away and I got angry at that person. So, and this leads into the question of whether anger is involuntary or not. And Seneca says, no, it's not involuntary. And some other people have agreed with him on that. It's not the work of a mere involuntary impulse. And what he's saying is you can insert reason into that before you let it cascade. Anger only gains a foothold in us with the mind's approval, he says. Jean-Paul Sartre said something similar, and others have said something similar about, let's say that you become a Nazi collaborator and you say, oh, well, you know, it just kind of happened. Or I fell in love with somebody that I should not have fallen in love with. Well, they would say, well, okay, it's the same thing as this anger. You make a number of incremental decisions. If you fall in love with somebody you should not fall in love with, first you saw them across the room, then you smiled at them, then you went over and chatted with them, and then you had coffee. And so it wasn't you just boom, you fell in love. It was that you made a number of these incremental decisions. And so the existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre and other existentialists, as well as Seneca, are saying, no, that you really you do have control over these things that you say, gee, I just flew off the handle and I slugged that guy because I got angry. And they're saying, no, that's not how it works. So that's Seneca's view on anger. And I can tell you, as I said, that I do try to incorporate his ideas about anger into my daily life, and it does help. Seneca's had an impact on, and this is a very partial list, but a large number of people, including Montaigne, Michel de Montaigne, who's another one of my favorites. And he also has had effects on people's lives much more recently, and as I said, has become fairly popular. So what Seneca would say about living well is that we need to live a philosophical life of integrity, a life that is simple, has a purpose that we're aiming for, a life that recognizes that suffering and struggle is inevitable. That's what fate brings us, and luck and chance, and a life where your anger can be managed. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much.